A simple plea for help uncovers a new neighbor in a house that seems to hide secrets. As Tom tries to fix a broken sink, he notices signs that something far too significant is being disguised there. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment rating this from 1 to 10 and tell us where you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. Sarah's sink had given way suddenly, spilling water across the floor as if releasing an ancient grievance, and Tom, accustomed to fixing what broke both in the world and within, himself crossed the yard with his daughter by the hand, imagining it would be just another neighborly kindness. Lily, with her 7 years and eyes too observant for her age, watched everything with that silent curiosity of children who learn the world without asking too many questions. She held her father's hand with gentle strength, confidently, as if knowing that as long as she was there, nothing bad could happen. The yard between their two houses was small, separated only by a low wooden fence that he had built years ago, when Lily was still crawling, and he needed something to do with his hands while processing the recent absence of her mother. The grass was tall, needing a mow, and wildflowers grew haphazardly in the corners, giving the space an air of purposeful neglect, as if nature had decided to reclaim what humans had left behind. Upon entering Sarah's house, however, he sensed something different in the air. It wasn't just the smell of fresh paint or the excessive gleam of new furniture. It was something more subtle, more unsettling. The house seemed too tidy for someone who claimed to have just moved in, as if it were a hurried set designed by someone who had studied how a house should look, but had never truly lived in one. Every object was in its right place, but it lacked the natural chaos of someone still settling in, those half-opened boxes, those temporarily misplaced items, the honest mess of a genuine move. The boxes stacked in the corner of the living room appeared empty, placed there merely to create an impression. He noticed this in the way they were perfectly aligned, without torn tape, without pen marks indicating contents. They were props, and this bothered him in a way he couldn't fully explain. Sarah, trying to appear at ease, followed his movements with restrained attention, preventing her eyes from lingering too long on the documents piled on the kitchen table, where discreet stamps and logos seemed to reveal more than she wished to show. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, but there was something in the way she wore them, in the perfect fit, the subtle quality of the fabric, that betrayed a lifestyle different from what that neighborhood suggested. He noticed her hands, slender and well-kept, without calluses or marks of someone who genuinely needed to call a neighbor to fix a sink. Her nails were professionally manicured, discreet but impeccable. He also noticed the way she breathed, a little faster than necessary, as if his presence there was simultaneously desired and feared. There was a contradiction in her every gesture, as if she were constantly reminding herself to play a role she hadn't fully mastered. As he knelt to assess the damage under the sink, Lily walked around the room with quiet curiosity, noticing small things that adults pretended not to see. Her small fingers lightly grazed the furniture, feeling the texture of the new wood, observing the absence of photographs on the walls, the lack of life on the shelves. There were books, but they seemed too new, chosen more for their covers than their content. There were decorative objects, but they lacked the disorder of items with history, with memory, with personal meaning. Everything was beautiful but empty, like a magazine house that no one truly inhabits, like an expensive hotel trying to look like a home. Lily, with that keen perception children have before they learn to ignore the obvious, frowned slightly, but said nothing. She simply continued her silent exploration, touching things with reverence, as if she were in a museum. Sarah offered water, coffee, anything to fill the uncomfortable silences that began to accumulate in the air like suspended dust. Her voice had an artificial tone of hospitality, as if she were following a mental script of how neighbors should behave. But Tom, Accustomed to observing before judging, accustomed to reading between the lines of human behavior after years of fixing houses and listening to stories, simply continued his work, realizing that the broken sink wasn't the only thing out of place in that house. A subtle tension permeated every room, as if Sarah carried something that didn't fit into that simple neighborhood. He had known those streets for years, since before Lily was born, since the days when he was still married and had different plans for his life. He knew the name of every resident, the history of every corner, who planted which tree, which house was built first, where the children played in the summer. And she didn't belong there, at least not in the way she tried to appear. The leak wasn't as serious as she had made it sound on the phone. A loose connection, a valve not fully closed, perhaps even intentionally loosened. A 15-minute job, 20 at most. But as he worked, kneeling on the cold kitchen floor, he felt the weight of her gaze on his back, as if he were being evaluated, measured, studied. It wasn't the usual look of someone grateful for help. It was something else, something he couldn't yet name, but that left him slightly uncomfortable, as if he were being tested without knowing the rules of the game. He heard her breathing, louder than it should be for someone merely observing a simple repair. He heard the nervous shuffle of her feet on the hardwood floor. He heard the discreet clink of something metallic she fidgeted with in her hands, probably without realizing it. They were small sounds, but significant, forming a symphony of anxiety that contrasted with the forced calm of her posture. Lily returned from the living room, holding a children's book she had found on the coffee table. It was new, still smelling of fresh paper, with no reading marks, no dog-eared pages, none of those smudged fingerprints that real books accumulate when they are loved. Sarah quickly took the book from Lily's hands with a smile that tried to be natural but trembled at the edges, revealing nerves she tried to hide. "Sorry, I'm still organizing everything," she said, and her voice sounded strange, as if rehearsed, as if prepared for this specific moment. There was a performative quality to those words, a cadence that didn't match the casual situation. He finished the repair in silence, carefully tightening the connections, testing the flow, cleaning up the mess the water had made. He washed his hands in the now-working sink, feeling the cold water run between his fingers, and politely declined the coffee she insisted on offering. Something in that house urged him to leave quickly, a primitive instinct that had no logic but was impossible to ignore. But at the same time, it held him there, as if there was a mystery his mind was already beginning to unravel without permission, like a puzzle he hadn't asked to solve but couldn't leave incomplete. Lily held his hand again on the way out, and he realized she also felt something strange. She looked back once at Sarah standing in the doorway, waving with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and whispered softly, "She's sad, Dad." And perhaps that was it. Behind all that careful construction, all that meticulously assembled facade, lay a profound sadness, the kind that isn't cured by money or a change of address, the kind you carry inside no matter where you go. In the following days, the town began to whisper. The whispers started subtly, in bakery conversations, bank lines, on park benches where old folks gathered to play dominoes and gossip about others' lives. They spoke of a powerful figure rumored to be living discreetly in the area, someone linked to decisions that moved investments and changed the fate of entire neighborhoods. The conversations were hushed, always with that air of knowing something important but not being sure whether to share it, with that mix of excitement and fear that privileged information usually brings. Some said she was an entrepreneur on the run, hiding from scandals in the big city. Others swore she was an heiress in voluntary exile, fleeing a family that wanted to control her. There were even those who whispered about political connections, about decisions made behind closed doors that would affect the entire region. But no one was sure of anything. They were just rumors, feeding off other rumors, growing and transforming with each repetition, as often happens in small towns where other people's lives are the most accessible entertainment. Tom didn't connect the rumors to Sarah until he noticed, in the dead of night, two cars parked further down the street, always positioned at the same time, always with quiet people inside. They were dark cars, discreet but clearly expensive models, the kind of vehicle that tries not to draw attention, but ends up doing so precisely because it tries too hard. He thought it was a coincidence the first night, maybe someone waiting for a resident, perhaps a couple seeking privacy, until he noticed the pattern. Always the same cars, always the same positions, always the same time, between 10 and midnight, like human clocks marking a time he didn't understand. One night, too curious to ignore, he got closer than he should have, walking with the dog Lily had adopted months ago, and one of the cars simply vanished as he approached too closely. Vanished not in the sense of driving away, but of disappearing into the darkness as if it had never been there, awakening a suspicion he didn't want to entertain, but that became inevitable, growing in his mind like a weed no one asked for but insisted on sprouting. He started paying more attention. He noticed that whenever Sarah left or entered her house, the cars shifted slightly, as if adjusting their viewing angle. He noticed there were codes, lights flashing in specific sequences, silent communication he recognized from times he preferred to forget. From a previous life he had left behind, when he decided that being a father was more important than anything else. They were security cars, or surveillance, or both, and that completely transformed the nature of that mysterious neighbor. She wasn't just someone rich trying to live simply. She was someone who needed to be protected or watched, and he wasn't sure which option was more unsettling. The clues intensified when Lily found a folder dropped behind Sarah's sofa, full of city plans, contracts, urban studies, and documents with important signatures he recognized from local newspapers. It was on a Saturday morning, one of those days when the sun streamed through the windows, promising good weather and life felt lighter. Lily had gone to return a plate Sarah had lent days earlier, full of homemade cookies that looked store-bought, so perfect, too symmetrical, too golden, without the charming irregularities that truly homemade baked goods carry. The folder was partially hidden, as if it had been hastily put away and forgotten. Lily, with that brutal honesty of children who haven't yet learned to pretend they don't see inconvenient things, brought it into the living room, asking what all of it was. And in the second it took Sarah to process the situation, to invent a plausible excuse, Tom had already seen enough. Street names he had known since childhood, detailed maps of the neighborhood with areas marked in different colors, urban development proposals, contracts with figures that made his head ache just to imagine. Sarah, realizing that Tom had seen the contents, that his eyes had captured information she wasn't ready to share, froze for a second before trying to rearrange everything with discreet haste, as if it were too late to pretend simplicity. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the papers, and he pretended not to notice the tremor, pretended to be more interested in keeping Lily occupied, but both knew something fundamental had broken in that moment. An invisible line had been crossed. A secret had been partially revealed, and there was no going back to the previous state of convenient ignorance. The same day, a few hours later, as he was still mentally processing everything he had seen in those documents, a call completely changed her demeanor. She moved away from Tom and Lily, as if suddenly the weight of the world she had been trying to hide had returned with full force, falling upon her shoulders like an invisible lead cloak. Tom, attentive to the way she took a deep breath before hanging up, how she pressed her lips together as she listened, how her fingers closed into a fist against her thigh, understood that there was something too big to ignore and too intimate to be easily exposed. "Sorry," she said after hanging up, putting the phone in her pocket with unnecessary force, as if she wanted to break it. "Work." The word came out dry, final, a door abruptly closing. He simply nodded, took Lily's hand with the delicacy he had perfected over years as a single father, and politely said goodbye, keeping his voice neutral, without judgment, without apparent curiosity. But as they walked home, crossing the yard that separated their two lives, his mind wouldn't stop processing what he had seen in those papers, connecting dots that began to form a worrying picture. Familiar names of local politicians, familiar addresses of establishments that were part of the neighborhood's soul, projects that would directly affect the area where he had built his simple, functional life after everything else had crumbled. "Dad, is Sarah in trouble?" Lily asked, looking back as they walked. He followed her gaze and saw Sarah still standing at the window, phone back to her ear, her expression tense even from a distance. "I think so," he replied honestly, because he never lied to Lily about important things, and this seemed important, even if he didn't yet know exactly why. "Can we help?" "I don't know if she wants help, honey." "But everyone wants help when they're sad," Lily retorted, with that simple logic only children possess, that ability to see the essential without getting lost in the complicated details adults use to justify their inaction. Their closeness, however, did not cease. Paradoxically, after that incident that could have created distance, Sarah began appearing at the workshop with small excuses, more and more frequently. A dripping faucet, a cabinet that didn't fit right, a stuck lock, a broom handle that needed replacing, small things anyone could fix themselves or with an online tutorial, but which she brought to him with a regularity that made it clear it wasn't the broken objects that needed attention. This created an unexpected rhythm that Tom recognized as an attempt at belonging. He had seen it before in other people, this desire to be part of something, to be included in a routine, to have a legitimate excuse to be close. It was touching and sad at the same time because it revealed a loneliness that not all the money or power in the world could fill. He received her with gentle professionalism, fixed what she brought with the care he dedicated to all his work, and politely but firmly refused payment without offense. And she insisted, always with that smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as if she were playing a role she didn't fully master, following a mental script of how these interactions should happen, but without truly understanding their essence. Lily, with her light and welcoming presence, made everything less complicated, bringing them closer naturally, unaware that she was becoming the balancing point between two radically different worlds. She talked to Sarah about simple, trivial things, the kind adults often ignore as unimportant. Cartoons, favorite colors, the orange cat that sometimes appeared in the yard, and that Lily had named Sylvester, despite it not being black and white. And Sarah responded with a genuine attention that surprised Tom, as if those silly conversations were the most important moments of her day, as if every word from the child was a precious thing to be cherished. She would kneel to be at Lily's eye level, held her drawings as if they were valuable works of art, remembered details from previous conversations in a way that showed she truly paid attention, that it genuinely mattered. Still, every step forward seemed to be accompanied by something hidden, as if Sarah was building a trust she feared she didn't deserve, as if every brick placed in this fragile bridge between them came with the certainty that eventually the weight would be too much and everything would collapse. One particularly hot summer afternoon, as he sanded a door she had brought in complaining it scratched the floor, Sarah sat in an old, worn chair in the workshop, one of those he should have thrown out years ago, but kept out of sentimental stubbornness, and just sat there, observing. She said nothing for long minutes, perhaps 20, perhaps 30, time losing relevance in the hypnotic rhythm of manual labor. She just watched his work, the precise movement of his calloused hands, the quiet concentration of someone who knew his craft well and found peace in it. Sweat trickled down his forehead, and he wiped it with his forearm without stopping work, maintaining a steady rhythm, the rhythmic sound of sandpaper against wood filling, the comfortable silence between them. Sawdust was in the air, that good smell of worked wood, and the afternoon light slanted through the high workshop windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced as the hours passed. "You like what you do," she finally said, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question, it was an observation made with something that seemed like admiration, or perhaps envy. "Yes," he replied without stopping his work, keeping his focus on the wood, on the imperfections that needed smoothing. "It's honest." The word carried weight, multiple meanings, as if saying much more than just about woodworking. She smiled differently this time, a small, almost sad smile that touched her lips but brought melancholy to her eyes. "Honest," she repeated, as if tasting the weight of that word in her mouth, as if it were a foreign language she knew theoretically, but had never truly spoken. She was silent for a few more minutes, then added so softly he almost didn't hear, "I don't remember the last time I did something honest." He stopped sanding for a moment, looked at her directly, and saw something in her expression that caught him off guard. Pure vulnerability, unfiltered, unmasked, and then, as if regretting revealing so much, she looked away, straightened her posture, and the curtain fell again over whatever lay beneath. The tension increased considerably when the city announced suddenly and without prior public consultation a massive urban project that could profoundly alter the area where Tom's workshop was located. Modernization plans emerged as a silent threat to the simple daily life he had built, brick by brick, after his previous life had imploded, and rumors about the mysterious neighbor's involvement began to circulate with increasing intensity. City officials commented without realizing he was listening, while waiting to be served at the counter to renew permits, that she had enough influence to decide the future of the entire region, that a word from her could make buildings rise or entire neighborhoods be preserved. And her expression, whenever the subject came up casually in the conversations they still had, confirmed more than her words would ever admit. He began to notice other details he had previously ignored or considered irrelevant. The way well-dressed people, with that unmistakable air of power and haste, appeared at her house at strange hours, usually after most neighbors were already asleep. The meetings that took place behind closed doors, with cars parked strategically far enough not to draw attention but close enough to be functional. The way she checked the street before leaving or entering, that quick but calculated glance that swept the area, looking for threats or witnesses, all small but significant when added up, forming a mosaic that revealed a reality very different from the simple facade she tried to maintain. One particularly moonless night, he found her sitting on the curb in front of her house, alone, looking at the city's starless sky, the neighborhood lights creating that light pollution that steals the universe's magnificence. She was barefoot, her feet touching the asphalt, still warm from the day, and there was something so profoundly lonely in that image that he hesitated before approaching, fearing he would break a moment that seemed sacred in its sadness, but something made him walk over to her. Perhaps the same compulsion to fix broken things that led him to work with wood and metal. Perhaps just basic human empathy, impossible to ignore when so clearly needed. "Everything okay?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance, ready to retreat if she signaled she wanted to be alone. She took a moment to respond, as if returning from far away, from thoughts too deep to be easily abandoned. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were bright, perhaps with suppressed tears, perhaps just the reflection of the streetlights. "Sometimes I forget what it's like to just exist," she said, and each word seemed to cost her considerable effort. Without needing to be anything more than someone sitting on the curb, without needing to make decisions that affect hundreds of people, without needing to calculate consequences, without needing to put on the armor. He sat beside her, maintaining a respectful but present distance, making it clear he was there if she needed him, but that he wouldn't press for more than she was willing to offer. "You can be that whenever you want," he said simply, believing in the truth of those words. She laughed, but there was no joy in the sound, only a bitter acknowledgement of an impossibility. "No," she replied, her voice filled with a sad certainty. "I can't. Every time I try to just exist without thinking, reality pulls me back. A call, a document that needs a signature, a decision that can't wait. It's like trying to breathe underwater, theoretically possible for a few seconds, but inevitably fatal if you insist." They sat there in silence for a time that seemed suspended, outside the normal flow of hours. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights painting long shadows before disappearing around the bend. A dog barked in the distance. A window lit up and then went dark. Ordinary life continued its indifferent course around them as they shared that moment of fragile quiet. "Why did you come to live here?" he finally asked, curiosity overcoming caution. "Of all the places someone with your resources could choose. Why this neighborhood?" she thought before answering, as if deciding how much of the truth she could share without completely exposing herself. "Because it still feels real here," she finally said. "People here have real problems, real joys, real lives. It's not all performance and strategy. When your neighbor asks how you are, they really want to know. They're not calculating how to use the information. When a child smiles at you, it's because they want to, not because they've been trained to charm potential investors." She paused, took a deep breath. "I wanted to remember what that was like, before I completely forget that I was human too." Tom only fully understood the total dimension of the truth when he discovered, a few days later through a series of events that seemed orchestrated by fate to reveal secrets, that Sarah was, in fact, the owner of half the town, including literally the house where he lived with Lily. The revelation didn't come from a direct confession, but from unavoidable circumstances, from papers that appeared in the wrong place, and from people who referred to her with titles and deference that didn't match. Her simple appearance and attempts at anonymity. It was on a regular Monday morning. An envelope mistakenly left on his doorstep, addressed to her with a full name he had never heard, followed by an impressive list of professional titles. He was simply going to return it, unopened, respecting others' privacy as he always did. But the envelope was poorly sealed, torn at one end, probably during delivery, and when he picked it up to take it to her, some document slipped out and fell onto the wooden porch floor, scattering like playing cards, and there it was. Impossible to ignore. His home address, the street where Lily had grown up, listed among dozens of properties, her name as the official owner. Dozens, no, hundreds of other addresses. Commercial properties he knew, empty lots that now made sense, entire buildings, complete blocks. A list that seemed endless, a real estate empire he didn't even know existed, hidden behind corporate entities and structures that only now revealed themselves to be connected to a single person. He gathered the papers with hands that trembled slightly, not from anger but from a kind of cognitive vertigo, like when you discover that the ground beneath your feet isn't as solid as you thought. He carefully put everything back in the envelope and stood there, holding it as if it were a bomb about to explode. This discovery deeply shook the relationship that was forming between them, creating a cautious distance that he tried to disguise, tried to act as if nothing had changed, but that she felt immediately with that keen perception of someone who had spent her life reading intentions and detecting subtle shifts in power dynamics. Her visits to the workshop became less frequent, more spaced out, with intervals that grew each week. Their conversations, when they happened, became shorter, more superficial, losing that quality of growing intimacy they had been developing. He didn't know how to process it, How to deal with the information that the woman who pretended to need help fixing small things literally owned everything around him, including the roof over his daughter's head. Did he feel manipulated? Deceived? He wasn't sure. Perhaps a little of both. But more than that, he felt small in a way he hadn't in years, not since the days right after his divorce, when he had to start from scratch and every small victory seemed impossible. That feeling that his entire life fit in the palm of another person's hand, that his stability depended on the goodwill of someone he barely knew, was deeply disturbing. Sarah, sensing his growing distrust even without him saying anything, even through the forced smiles and maintained cordiality, began to isolate herself further in her house, as if fearing to hurt precisely those she most wished to protect. He could see the light on late, well after midnight, sometimes even in the early hours of the morning, and he could imagine her pacing back and forth in that space too large for one person, a space that was both refuge and prison, a symbol of success and a mark of loneliness. Lily was the first to notice the change and, as always, the first to name the problem with brutal clarity. "Sarah doesn't come here anymore," she said one day during dinner, pushing the rice around her plate with her fork, that universal way children express discontent. And there was accusation in those simple words, a direct judgment that adults would disguise in passive-aggressive communication, but that she delivered unfiltered. "She's busy," he replied, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. "You're lying," she countered, with that brutal honesty of children who haven't yet learned that sometimes polite lies are socially necessary. "You don't like her anymore. I saw you looking at her differently." He didn't know what to say to that, because it wasn't true. The problem was exactly the opposite. He liked her, perhaps even more than he should, and that made everything infinitely more complicated. How do you build something real with someone who lives in a completely different universe from yours? How do you trust someone who hid something so fundamental about who they are? "It's complicated, honey," was all he could manage. "Adults always say that when they don't want to explain," she replied, letting her fork clatter onto her plate with a sound that echoed like an accusation in the small kitchen. Despite his distancing, despite the unspoken tension that now permeated every interaction, her signs of concern for Tom and Lily continued to surface in small actions that seemed accidental but were clearly intentional for anyone who knew where to look. An adjustment to the street lighting that made their path easier at night happened without prior announcement, without official explanation. Suddenly, the dark corner where Lily always feared to pass was lit up like day, with new poles and powerful lamps that transformed night into artificial twilight. Neighbors commented, surprised, grateful, without knowing whom to thank. But he knew. A silent authorization for his workshop to remain outside the first impact areas of the urban project appeared in official documents he had to sign, without clear explanation of how or why he had been included in a list of exceptions. The city official who served him seemed as surprised as he was, checking and rechecking the papers, but it was all there, official, stamped, impossible to question. A document intentionally left on the workshop table one of the last times she appeared, strategically opened to the right page, indicated that she was trying to intervene to preserve the entire neighborhood, not just his workshop or the properties that most interested investors. Alternative plans, social and historical impact studies, revitalization proposals that would not expel old residents but integrate them into the modernization process. All in her elegant handwriting, in the margins of the official documents, notes that showed someone genuinely concerned, truly trying to make a difference. Nothing explicit, nothing directly acknowledged, never an open conversation about what she was doing or why, but enough to show that there was a constant internal struggle between her professional responsibilities, the expectations of partners and investors, and her personal feelings that were growing in directions she probably hadn't planned. He wanted to confront her. He mentally prepared the speech dozens of times while working, while taking Lily to school, while lying awake staring at the ceiling in the dark of night. He wanted to ask, why all the theatre? Why pretend to be someone who needed help when in reality she controlled everything, including his and Lily's fate? But every time he prepared himself, took a deep breath ready to lay his cards on the table, he remembered the way she looked at his daughter, with a tenderness that couldn't be faked, no matter how good an actress someone was, with a vulnerability that didn't match power or corporate control, as if every moment with Lily was too precious to be wasted, too urgent to be postponed. And so he hesitated, postponed, left it for another day that never came. It was on a heavy Sunday afternoon that everything changed unexpectedly. Lily fell ill. Nothing serious initially, just a fever that rose too quickly and scared him, in the way children's fevers do, transforming vibrant children into small, fragile, overheated beings. He was preparing cold compresses, trying to get Lily to drink liquids, measuring her temperature every 15 minutes with growing concern, when he heard an insistent knock on the door. It was Sarah, and the sight that greeted him was surprising. She carried a large bag full of age-appropriate medicine for children, real homemade soup this time, still steaming in a thermal container, and a concern in her eyes that dispensed with any mask or performance. There was no calculation there, no strategy, just poorly disguised panic from someone who genuinely cared. "Someone told me she was sick," was all she explained, breathless as if she had run, and perhaps she had. "How is she? Have you taken her temperature, given her fever reducer? Does she need to go to the hospital? I can drive, I have the car." He let her in, surprised by her urgency, by the way she didn't wait for an invitation, just walked past him directly to where Lily was. And for the first time since the discovery of who she really was, they looked at each other without barriers, without the tension that had been poisoning every recent interaction. She knelt beside the bed, where Lily dozed restlessly, touched her forehead with infinite delicacy, that universal gesture of care that transcends social classes and power differences, and he saw tears forming in her eyes, threatening to overflow. "I never had this," she whispered, so low he almost didn't hear, so low that perhaps it wasn't meant for him to hear. "Someone to take care of me when I got sick. Someone who truly cared if I was okay or not. My parents, they had staff for that. And later, when I grew up, I had private doctors, assistants, people paid to ensure I was functional. But never—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. He understood then, with crystal-clear clarity that reorganized his entire understanding of the situation, that the power, the money, the properties, the impressive titles, none of it filled the void she carried, and that perhaps she hadn't been pretending to be fragile when she first appeared asking for help with a broken sink. Perhaps she truly was fragile, just in a way that no document or corporate title could reveal or remedy. "Thank you for coming," he said, and those were the first truly kind words, without reservations or underlying tension, that he had addressed to her since the discovery that had changed everything. She just nodded, unable to speak without her voice breaking, quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and stayed there with them until the fever broke, until Lily woke up a few hours later and smiled when she saw her, until the night swallowed the day and transformed everything into soft silhouettes in the light of the room's yellowish bedside lamp. It was on that long night of shared vigil, as they alternated compresses and temperature checks, as Lily slept and woke in irregular cycles, that they finally talked for real. Not about properties or urban projects, not about secrets or revelations, about small things that mattered, about fears, about loneliness, about how hard it is to trust when you've been betrayed before, about how hard it is to be vulnerable when vulnerability has always been used against you. "I was going to tell you," she said at some point in the early morning when the house was so silent that any word seemed amplified, "about who I am, about what I own. But every time I tried, I saw how you looked at me, how you treated me like a normal person, and I didn't want to lose that. I know it was selfish, I know it was wrong, but it was the first time in years that someone saw me as just a person, not as an opportunity or a threat or a useful connection." He was silent for a long moment, processing this, weighing honesty against resentment, understanding against hurt. "I understand," he finally said, and it was true. "But you have to understand too. Discovering that the person I was starting to—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Trust is literally my landlord, owns the house where I'm raising my daughter, where I built our life. That changes everything. It creates a power imbalance that's impossible to ignore. I can transfer the property," she said quickly, anxiously, "to you, no cost. Or I can sell it to someone else if you prefer not to accept it from me. I don't want you to feel—" "It's not about that," he interrupted gently. "It's not about the house specifically. It's about the fact that you have the power to change my life completely, to transform the entire neighborhood, to decide who stays and who leaves. How do I build something real with someone who exists in a completely different dimension of power?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice small, defeated. "I really don't know. But I want to try to find out. If you let me." As the town prepared for the Spring Festival, an annual event that transformed the streets into a celebration of colors and music, their relationship gained new layers of complexity and tenderness. There was something different in the air, not just the flowers beginning to bloom on the trees, filling the streets with colors that seemed to celebrate something that still had no name, but a shift in their dynamic, a renewed willingness to try. Lily, recovered from her fever and seemingly unharmed by the medical crisis that had so frightened the adults, rehearsed a dance that Sarah had offered to teach her, revealing a delicate and artistic side that she rarely showed to adults, keeping it hidden behind the mask of an efficient executive. It happened naturally, organically. Lily casually mentioned that she wanted to participate in the school's performance at the festival, but didn't know how to dance, had never learned, and her father didn't have the skill or time to teach her. And Sarah, who was having coffee in the workshop that Saturday afternoon, just sitting there in a quiet companionship that had become a habit, simply said she could help, that she had danced a lot when she was a child, before life became too serious for frivolous things like dance. Tom watched the rehearsals when he could, between projects in the workshop, torn between the prudence that told him to keep his distance and the growing desire to believe that the woman behind the power was real, human, and deeply wounded in ways he was beginning to understand. She guided Lily's steps with surprising patience, corrected mistakes with a gentleness that contrasted with stories he had heard about her business reputation, laughed when Lily invented her own movements and transformed the choreography into something uniquely hers. There was genuine joy in these moments, a lightness in her that seemed years younger, as if the dance freed something that had been trapped for decades. "You dance really well," Lily said with genuine admiration after a particularly good rehearsal. "Where did you learn?" "I danced a lot when I was your age," she replied, and there was deep nostalgia in her voice, a lament for something lost. "Before I forgot that I could do things just because they were beautiful, without needing a strategic justification or a return on investment. Before I turned everything into a transaction." Lily considered this with disproportionate seriousness for her 7 years. "You can remember again," she said simply. "I can help you, just like you're helping me." Even so, the growing closeness between the three was accompanied by a kind of suspension, as if everyone was on the verge of something they still didn't dare to fully face. Every gesture carried multiplied weight. Every word was measured and re-measured mentally before being spoken. Every silence meant more than it should, loaded with everything that wasn't being said. Tom began to notice details about her that he hadn't perceived before, or perhaps had chosen to ignore during the period of tension. The way she always checked if Lily was dressed warmly enough before leaving, even on days that weren't really cold, as if she couldn't tolerate the idea of the child feeling uncomfortable. The way she subtly left small gifts in places Lily would find them, a new book on the workshop bench, a toy strategically forgotten on a chair, a package of treats Lily loved mysteriously appearing, always with the transparent excuse that she was just passing by and remembered. The almost reverent attention with which she listened to Lily's stories, no matter how silly or disconnected, kneeling to be at her eye level, asking questions that showed genuine interest, remembering details from previous conversations that even Tom sometimes forgot, as if every word from the child was a treasure to be stored in memory, carefully filed away in a safe place in her heart. And he also noticed his own gradual transformation, how he started to look for her with his eyes when he went out onto the street, that automatic glance towards her house before he even realized he was doing it. How the day seemed lighter, more full of possibilities when she appeared, even if it was just for a quick coffee or to pick up something she had left for repair. How her absence left a space he didn't know existed until it started to be filled by her, and how that space now hurt when it was empty. But there was always the shadow, that persistent awareness of the differences between them. The security cars that sporadically reappeared, less obvious now, but still present for those who knew where to look. The calls that made her abruptly withdraw with that closed expression, that professional mask descending over her face like a knight's visor before battle. The nights he saw the light on in her, house until dawn, imagining what decisions she was making there, alone, that would affect hundreds of people who didn't even know of her existence, and wondering how someone carried that weight without crumbling. The festival was fast approaching, the entire town prepared with growing enthusiasm. Colorful banners began to appear on the streets, strung between poles, swaying in the breeze. Decorative lights were installed, transforming the neighborhood into a magical version of itself when night fell. Stages were being set up in the main town squares, metal and wood structures growing like accelerated plants, promising music and performances. And with the festival, inevitably, came the final announcement about the urban project. The deadline for public objections had passed, the mandatory hearings had been held, and now only the final decision remained about which areas would be affected first, what the implementation schedule would be, how many lives would be permanently altered by progress. He knew she was deeply involved in this decision-making process. He knew she had considerable power to change the course of everything, to protect or sacrifice as her interests or principles dictated. But he didn't know if he should ask, if he should speak openly about his concerns, if he should simply trust that she would do what was right, whatever her definition of right was. There was something deeply uncomfortable about depending on someone's kindness, especially someone who could easily choose the most profitable path. And even more uncomfortable to discover that this person was someone for whom he was beginning to develop feelings that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. One afternoon, a few days before the festival, while Lily rehearsed her dance in Sarah's spacious living room, temporarily transformed into an impromptu studio with mirrors leaned against the walls and music playing on a sophisticated sound system, he stood in her kitchen preparing coffee. It had become a silent ritual between them, this exchange of small domestic courtesies, him making coffee the way she liked it while she taught his daughter, creating a temporary illusion of family, of shared routine, of mutual belonging. And he saw, left open on the granite countertop, a document, Urban Revitalization Proposal, Final Phase. The header read in official, intimidating letters. And there, carefully highlighted in fluorescent yellow, were all the establishments that would be preserved in the first phase, including his workshop, highlighted in a brighter yellow, including the homes of the old neighbors, each address meticulously listed, including the corner bakery where Lily bought bread every morning, including everything that gave life, history, and soul to that neighborhood that had become home. She entered the kitchen at that moment and saw that he was looking, that he had discovered yet another secret, yet another silent intervention. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "It's not decided yet," she finally said, and her voice was heavy with a weariness that went beyond the physical. "Some people want to raise everything, start from scratch, build new, shiny buildings without history or memory. More profit, less complication, less community resistance. It's simpler that way, apparently." "And you?" he asked, holding the cup of coffee he had just prepared, using it as a physical anchor as he navigated increasingly turbulent emotional waters. She hesitated, ran a hand over her face in a gesture of exhaustion, and he noticed the dark circles under her eyes that careful makeup couldn't completely hide. "I'm trying to do what's right, but it's not always easy to know what's right when every choice harms someone. Preserving the neighborhood means less. Return for investors means potential lawsuits, means political complications. But destroying it means ending stories, community, the life people have built here over decades." He approached slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted, but she didn't. And for the first time since everything had become complicated, he touched her arm intentionally. A brief touch, but real, loaded with support that words couldn't adequately convey. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said, and it meant much more than just the decision about the urban project. She looked at his hand on her arm, and something in her, his face completely disarmed, all those layers of defense she constantly used crumbling to reveal pure vulnerability. "I've always carried everything alone," she replied in a low, almost confessional voice. "For as long as I can remember. My parents trained me for it. Radical independence. Absolute self-sufficiency. Never trust anyone completely because everyone wants something from you. And for so long it worked, you know. It was easier that way. Safer. But also—" She paused, her voice faltering. "More lonely," he completed. "Devastatingly lonely," she agreed. And there were tears in her eyes now, not hidden, not fought, just there. "I don't know how to do it any other way. I don't know how to truly let someone in. I don't know how to trust without expecting betrayal. I don't know how to be vulnerable without feeling weak." From the living room, Lily's voice called out, wanting to show a part of the choreography she had finally gotten right. They quickly, instinctively pulled away, recomposing the masks they wore in front of the child, trying to shield her from the emotional complexity they were still navigating. But something fundamental had changed in that moment. A door had opened, even if only a crack, revealing possibilities that both were afraid to name. That night, the festival officially began with a fireworks display that lit up the entire town sky, transforming the darkness into temporary explosions of color and light. Lily cheered at the window, enchanted by the bright colors reflecting in her wide eyes, her face illuminated by that pure joy that only children can maintain in the face of simple things. And he looked at the house next door, where a feminine silhouette also watched the sky through her own window, and thought about how sometimes the most powerful people were also the most lonely, carrying fortunes but emotionally starving, controlling entire cities but unable to control the emptiness that grew within them. In the following days, as the festival transformed the neighborhood into a continuous celebration, something visibly began to change in her. As if she had made an important decision, or perhaps finally accepted something she had been denying. She started appearing more frequently, not with excuses about broken things, but simply showing up, bringing food, offering help, being present in ways that went beyond neighborly obligations. She helped decorate his workshop for the festival, hanging colorful banners and paper lanterns with almost childlike enthusiasm. She spent an entire afternoon helping Lily choose her dance costume, trying on different clothing combinations with infinite patience, as if she had absolutely nothing more important to do, as if there were no urgent emails or crucial meetings awaiting her attention. She showed up one morning with ingredients to make pancakes, simply because she had heard Lily comment that she loved pancakes, but her dad never had time to make them. And she stayed there in his small kitchen, teaching the child to flip pancakes in the air, laughing when they messed up. And the batter fell to the floor, creating glorious mess and memories that would be cherished forever. Tom observed these interactions with growing emotion that he tried to control but couldn't completely. He saw a transformation happening in her, in real time, as if she was slowly shedding layers of armor she had worn for so long that she had forgotten what it was like to exist without them. The narrative now moved forward with less caution, less fear, though the complexity remained. Small gestures continued to bridge the emotional chasms they were trying to cross, but now with more confidence, with more willingness to take risks. Tom found himself still torn between protecting Lily above all else and allowing a new bond to form, a bond that could change their lives in ways he couldn't fully foresee. Every time he caught himself thinking of Sarah with growing affection, with the kind of feeling that went beyond friendship or superficial attraction, came the weight of parental responsibility. He was a father before anything else, had been since the moment he held his newborn daughter for the first time and swore to protect her from everything, and bringing someone into that carefully constructed life, someone with so much power, so many secrets, so many complications, seemed irresponsible, seemed to risk the stability he had fought so hard to create. But Lily saw no complications because she wasn't programmed yet to see them. For her, Sarah was simply someone who patiently taught her to dance, who read stories with funny voices and dramatic interpretation, who made her laugh with silly jokes, who hugged her with genuine care. And perhaps, he thought in the sleepless nights when he overanalyzed everything, the wisdom lay precisely in that. In seeing people for who they essentially were, not for what they possessed or represented in the grand scheme of things. In judging character, not circumstance. Sarah struggled daily to be seen beyond the empire she carried, beyond the titles that preceded her name in official documents. Every time someone treated her with excessive reverence, with that automatic deference that power and money command, every time a request from her was met without question, simply because she had the ability to ruin careers with a phone call, she felt more distant from who she truly was, beneath it all, or who she wanted to be, at least. The difference between real identity and desired identity was becoming increasingly clear to her, and more painful too. She began spending even more time in the workshop, not just visiting, but truly participating. Sometimes without elaborate excuses, without anything specific to fix, without a hidden agenda, just showing up, sitting there in that old chair he should have thrown out years ago, observing his work, listening to the rhythmic sound of tools, smelling the characteristic scent of wood being worked, as if that humble and honest space was the only place where she could simply exist without the weight of expectations. "Do you think people can truly change?" she asked one day, breaking a comfortable silence that had stretched for almost an hour. He stopped what he was doing, a chair he was refinishing for a client, wiped his hands on an old cloth stained with varnish and sweat. "Depends on what you mean by change. Stop being who they've always been, abandon identities they've carried their whole lives. Truly start over, not just change a dress or job, but fundamentally change who they are inside," He thought for a moment, weighing his answer, wanting to give her something real, not just comforting platitudes. "I think people can choose who they want to be from now on," he finally said. "The past doesn't go away. It never will. The things we've done, the people we've been, that's permanently etched in our history. But it doesn't have to define everything that comes after. We can decide what kind of person we want to be today and tomorrow, and keep deciding that every day. Real change isn't erasing who you were. It's consciously choosing who you will be." She was silent for a long time, absorbing those words as if they were water in the desert, as if they were exactly what she needed to hear but didn't know she needed. "What if who you were caused harm?" she asked softly. "What if the decisions you made, the things you prioritized, hurt people? Can you go back on that?" "No," he replied honestly. "You can't undo the past. But you can do things differently from now on. You can try to fix what can be fixed. You can apologize, even when there's no guarantee of forgiveness. You can choose differently today." And Lily, more sensitive than both imagined, more perceptive than was appropriate, for her age, realized that something precious was being built there, even if fragile, even if constantly threatened by external forces and internal doubts. She began to do small things with clear intention, trying to cement something that still had no official name, but that she instinctively recognized as a family in formation. Drawings that included all three of them, always together, always smiling, always in a domestic context. The three of them having dinner, the three of them at the park, the three of them watching TV. As if by drawing the reality she wanted, she could make it exist. Stories invented during bath time or before bed, where Sarah was always the heroine, saving the day with kindness instead of superpowers, with gentleness instead of strength. Insistent invitations to simple dinners that forced the adults to sit at the same table, to share meals, to create memories together. With the unconscious wisdom of childhood, that intuitive perception children have before they learn to complicate everything, she stitched together the pieces that tried to remain separate by fear or prudence or past trauma. The school dance performance finally arrived, taking place on the main stage in the town square, as part of the festival celebrations. Sarah was in the front row, arriving early to secure the best spot, recording with her cell phone with hands that trembled slightly from nervousness, as anxious as Tom himself, perhaps even more so. When Lily stepped onto the stage, small but confident in the costume they had chosen together, and performed the choreography they had practiced for weeks, both Sarah and Tom held their breath. And when she finished, when the music stopped and the applause began, Lily ran off the stage and directly to them, to both of them, as if there were no distinction, as if both were equally hers, equally important, equally family. She wrapped her small but strong arms around both of them, creating a circle that seemed, for a moment suspended in time, complete and perfect and unbreakably right. "You're my family," Lily said with devastating simplicity, with that brutal honesty that didn't understand why this needed to be complicated. "I love you, Dad, and I love you too, Sarah. You're the most important people in the world." And neither of the adults knew how to respond to that, how to argue against such a pure and simple truth, how to explain why childish love saw clarity where adults saw only complication. Sarah began to cry right there, in public, in front of hundreds of people, tears rolling unchecked or unhidden. And Tom instinctively, naturally, put his arm around her, and she allowed herself to be comforted right there in front of everyone, a public declaration of what had been forming in private. After the performance, the three walked together through the festival streets, now officially as a unit. Food stalls exuded tempting smells. Live music created a soundtrack for the night. Children ran in all directions with balloons and cotton candy. Sarah bought a huge pink cotton candy for Lily, and the three ate, sharing pieces, sitting on a worn park bench, watching the human movement around them, being part of it instead of just observing it from the outside. "I don't remember the last time I did this," she said, her voice still hoarse from crying, but there was a lightness in it now, something released that had been trapped for too long. "Ate cotton candy?" he asked, knowing it wasn't that, but wanting to hear the real answer. Was happy without thinking about anything else, without calculating consequences, without planning next steps, without wearing a mask, just happy, present, here. He looked at her, really looked, saw not the powerful woman who decided the future of the city, but someone tired of pretending strength, someone who perhaps just needed permission to be fragile, to be human, to be imperfect and still loved. "You can have that whenever you want," he said. "Whenever you want. You don't have to pretend anything here, you can just be. With flaws, with fears, with all the mess that being human entails. It's safe." She held Lily's hand a little, tighter, absorbing that promise, desperately wanting to believe it, but still afraid to trust completely. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "Then believe it," he replied simply. "It's a choice. Difficult, scary, but possible. You just have to choose." That night, after putting Lily to bed, exhausted from so much excitement and candy, he found Sarah sitting on the front steps of her house, exactly as that first time they really talked. He sat down beside her without asking permission, and she didn't protest, even seeming relieved by the company. "There's a meeting tomorrow," she said, looking at her. "Own hands. The absolutely final decision on the project. The main investors will be there, partners who put millions into this. They'll pressure me to approve the demolition of half the neighborhood, maybe more. They say it's necessary, inevitable progress, that it's modernization, that resisting is being sentimental and inefficient. And what will you do?" "I don't know yet," she confessed, and there was so much fear in that admission. "For the first time in my adult life, I truly don't know what decision to make. Before it was always clear. Maximum profit, maximum efficiency, maximum growth. Simple. But now you have something you never had before," he completed. "And what would that be?" she asked, turning to look at him directly. "Something to lose," he replied. "Or rather, something to protect that matters more than money." "I could lose everything," she said, her voice filled with real fear. "If I go against them on this decision, if I choose to preserve instead of demolish and rebuild, I could lose the investors' trust, my position in the company, partnerships I spent years building. I could literally lose everything I've built professionally. Or you could gain something, money, never." "Abort," he replied, echoing a previous conversation they had had. "And what would that be?" "The certainty that you did the right thing, that you slept in peace for the first time in years, that when you look in the mirror, you like who you see, that when that little girl inside grows up and asks what kind of person you were, you'll be able to answer honestly and feel proud." The silence that followed was dense with possibilities, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who were finally being completely honest, without games, without masks, without strategic calculations. "What if I choose right and still lose you?" she asked, so softly it almost got lost in the wind. "What if I do the right thing and still end up alone because I'm too complicated, because I bring too much baggage, because my world is too chaotic?" He turned his body to face her, held both her hands in his. "You won't lose me for doing the right thing. You would only lose me for not doing it. I can handle complicated. I can handle baggage. God knows I have my own. I can handle chaos. What I can't do is build something real with someone who chooses money over people when it matters. So do what you need to do tomorrow, and I'll be here when you get back, no matter the consequence." She cried again then, but this time it was different. It wasn't sadness or fear, it was relief. The deep relief of finally having someone who didn't want something from her, who just wanted her, complexity and all. The next morning arrived heavy with expectation. She left early, formally dressed in that dark pantsuit that was her professional armor, high heels that added authority, hair pulled back in a perfect bun, impeccable makeup hiding the sleepless night. The physical transformation was impressive. The woman who dined with them and ate cotton candy had been temporarily put away, replaced by the powerful executive who controlled fortunes. She looked at the workshop before getting into her car, and he was there, at the window, exactly where she knew he would be. They exchanged a look that said everything without needing words: strength, support, trust, nascent love that had not yet been named but already existed, undeniable and transformative. The hours dragged on like molasses. He tried to work, but couldn't concentrate. His hands made the movements automatically, muscle memory taking over while his mind was in that meeting room he had never seen, but could vividly imagine. Glass walls, huge table, men in expensive suits, numbers being projected, immense pressure on a person who just wanted to be seen as human. Lily sensed his anxiety, as she always sensed everything, and stayed quiet, drawing in a corner of the workshop, knowing with that childish intuition that it wasn't time to ask questions, that sometimes the best way to help was just to be silently present. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when she returned. The car stopped in front of her house, but she didn't get out immediately. She stayed inside, motionless, for long minutes that seemed like hours. He watched through the window, his heart tight, trying to read in her posture what had happened, if she had done what she thought was right or if she had given in to pressure. When she finally got out of the car, she was different, still formally dressed, but with something changed in her posture, something lighter in her shoulders, as if a weight had been removed. She walked directly to the workshop without even going into her house first, and he met her at the door. "I said no," were her first words, her voice firm, despite the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. No to demolition, no to the easy profit that would destroy history and community, no to everything that would turn this place into just another soulless, memoryless neighborhood. "And what happens now?" he asked, knowing there were consequences but needing to hear. She gave a tired but genuine smile, the first real smile he had seen on her that day. "Now I deal with the consequences. I lost 2 major partners who stormed out of the meeting promising lawsuits. I lost lucrative contracts because clients want to work with those who prioritize profit over sentimentality, as they called it. I lost the trust of people I thought were partners, but who were just people expecting a return on investment. But for the first time in years, maybe decades, I feel light. I looked in the company bathroom mirror before I left, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't hate what I saw. I still don't completely like it. I still have a lot of work to do on myself. But I didn't hate it, and that's a start." He didn't hesitate this time. He took a step towards her and pulled her into a hug that wasn't polite or restrained, but desperate and real and full of emotion that no longer fit inside. She allowed herself to be completely supported, sinking into that simple gesture that meant so much, allowing herself to be vulnerable, to be sustained, to be loved in her imperfection. "You're not alone," he said against her hair, breathing in the expensive perfume, mixed with stress sweat and a raw humanity that no perfume could mask. "I know," she replied, and it was true. For the first time in her adult life, she truly knew she wasn't alone, and more importantly, she was starting to believe that perhaps she didn't need to be. Lily appeared running from where she was drawing, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing it was something good, something that deserved celebration. She wrapped her small but strong arms around both of them, creating again that circle that was beginning to seem not just natural but necessary, essential, right in a way that defied logic but made perfect emotional sense. "We love you," Lily said with devastating simplicity, using the plural naturally, including herself and her father in a declaration that didn't ask permission but merely stated reality. And Sarah, who had never been good with emotional words, who always hid behind professionalism and strategic distance, whispered back, "I love you too, so much it scares me." The following days were strange and wonderful at the same time. News of her decision spread quickly through the town. The businesswoman who chose preservation over aggressive development, who chose community over maximum profit. Some called her crazy, saying she had committed professional suicide. Others called her an irresponsible idealist, incapable of making difficult but necessary decisions. But the neighborhood residents began to look at her in a completely different way, with genuine gratitude, with respect that wasn't based on fear or self-interest, but on recognition of a sacrifice made for their benefit. And that, she discovered, was worth more than any lost contract or dissolved partnership. She began frequenting local spots, not as an infiltrator trying to appear normal, but as part of it. The corner bakery, where she now knew the owner by name, and he saved fresh bread for her every morning. The corner store where she chatted about spices with Ms. Helen, who had worked there for 30 years. The town square where children played and now included her in games without ceremony, and people gradually accepted her presence not as the owner of their homes, but as a neighbor, as part of the community, as someone who chose to be there for reasons that went beyond real estate strategy. One afternoon, she was genuinely helping in the workshop, not just observing, but actually working, sanding wood until her hands ached, learning to use tools, making mistakes and trying again. There was sawdust in her hair and sweat on her forehead, and she had never seemed more beautiful to him than in that moment, stripped of all artificiality, just being human and imperfect and trying. "Do you regret it?" he asked, referring to the decision that had changed everything. "Every day," she replied honestly without trying to embellish or simplify. "And not a single day. It's strange to carry both at the same time." "What do you mean?" "There's a part of me that was trained my whole life to maximize profits, to make cold strategic decisions, to prioritize growth above sentiment. That part constantly screams that I was foolish, that I threw away an incredible opportunity, that I compromised my professional future for silly sentimentality. But there's another part, one I thought had died long ago, suffocated by ambition, that is at peace, profoundly at peace. And that peace is worth all the lost contracts." He smiled, continuing his work, but there was pride in that smile. "Then you're exactly where you need to be. In the middle, being human, being complicated, carrying contradictions, not being perfect but being real." She laughed, and the sound was light, without bitterness. "When did you get so wise about human nature?" "I'm not wise," he corrected. "I'm just someone who has lost a lot and learned the hard way that what truly matters fits in one hand, and that choosing difficult but right is always worth more than choosing easy but wrong, even when it hurts." She looked at Lily, playing in the yard with branches that had become swords, fighting imaginary battles against invisible dragons, completely absorbed in a fantasy world that only children can inhabit so completely. "And what fits in your hand?" she asked, turning to look at him directly, vulnerable in the question, hopeful in the way she awaited an answer. He didn't respond with words immediately. He simply stopped what he was doing, carefully cleaned his hands, and extended one of them open towards her. An invitation, a promise, a choice offered without pressure, but with clear hope. She looked at that calloused hand, honest, real, marked by years of work and care. And after taking a deep breath, preparing for the most terrifying leap of faith she had ever taken, She placed hers over it, intertwining fingers in a gesture that seemed both simple and monumentally significant. The promise of an unexpected destiny continued to form in everyday details, in the hesitation of gestures that became more confident, in the care deposited in the small things that built a solid foundation. Nothing grand, nothing cinematic in the sense of artificial spectacle, but real, profoundly real, the way only true life can be when you stop trying to control it and just allow it to happen, slowly preparing, day after day, the groundwork for a decision that would define whether that improbable encounter was born to survive or merely to transform each of them before their paths diverged again. But now, after everything, after difficult choices and shared vulnerability and risk taken, the answer was beginning to seem not just obvious, but inevitable in the best possible way. She began to completely reorganize her life. She delegated more responsibilities, trusting people she had trained but never truly trusted before. She distanced herself from businesses that didn't make sense for who she wanted to be, that served only to accumulate more zeros in a bank account that already had too many zeros. She kept what was necessary to sustain herself comfortably because she wasn't foolish and understood the importance of financial security. But she let go of everything that was excess, everything that demanded sacrificing time and soul and humanity. And with each thing she let go of, she seemed to breathe easier, as if she were finally shedding a weight she had carried for so long that she had forgotten what it was like to walk without it. Tom realized he was completely in love, not suddenly, not dramatically as movies suggested love should happen, but slowly, like someone who discovers that a presence has become essential without realizing exactly when the transition occurred. In the mornings when she brought coffee and they just sat drinking in comfortable silence before the day began. In the afternoons when she helped in the workshop and they worked in growing synchronicity. In the evenings when they read stories together to Lily, creating a routine that felt suspiciously familiar and wonderfully right. And she also fell in love. Perhaps for the first time truly, not with an image or potential or what someone could do for her, but with real human essence. With the simplicity he brought without apology. With the way he accepted her without judgment, even knowing all her flaws. With Lily, who taught her that family doesn't have to be blood, that love can be a conscious choice instead of a biological obligation. With that small life, seemingly insignificant by the standards she knew, that revealed itself to be the only one that truly mattered. But there was still residual fear in both. Fear of ruining something precious by moving too fast or not moving fast enough. Fear of not being enough for the other. Fear that the difference between their original worlds was too great for any bridge to sustain indefinitely. Rational and irrational fears mixed in a low but constant anxiety. It was Lily, as always, who forced the final truth out. "Dad, do you like Sarah? Really like her?" she asked during dinner on a Friday, the three of them at his small kitchen table as had become habit in recent weeks. He almost choked on the water he was drinking. Well, it's a simple question," Lily insisted with that relentless logic children employ when they want a real answer and won't accept. Adult evasion. "Yes or no?" Sarah looked at her plate intently, as if the food had suddenly become too fascinating to divert attention, but he could see the redness creeping up her neck, rising to her face. "Yes," he finally replied, deciding that honesty was the best policy, especially with a daughter who detected lies with frightening precision. "I like her a lot." "And you, Sarah? Do you like my dad?" She slowly raised her eyes, met his across the table, and there was so much in that gaze. Fear, hope, love, vulnerability. "Yes," she said clearly, without hesitation, "this time." I like him very much. I love him, actually. Then why do you keep pretending you don't? Why don't you officially date? Why don't you get married and live together and be a real family instead of just pretending you're not? Lily asked with growing frustration, as if adult stubbornness was an endless source of perplexity. A heavy silence fell over the table, the kind of silence that is an answer in itself, that reveals more than words could. Adults are so complicated, Lily finally concluded with a dramatic sigh, worthy of someone 3 times her age, returning to DC, eat as if she had solved a world problem that adults were incapable of seeing clearly. After Lily fell asleep, exhausted from having solved the adults' romantic lives with unquestionable childish logic, they stood on the porch, washing dishes in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but laden with everything that needed to be said. "She's right," he said finally, drying his hands. "We overcomplicate things. Or maybe it really is simple, and we're just afraid to accept simplicity." He dried his hands completely, turned to face her. "I'm scared," he admitted bluntly, "that I won't be enough for you. That one day you'll wake up and realize you could have any life, any person, and you chose this one, so small, so ordinary, so absolutely unremarkable, and you'll deeply regret it." She took a decisive step towards him, closing the physical distance that mirrored the emotional distance they tried to maintain for protection. "You think I want just any life? I've had any life. I've had unlimited power, more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, endless options. And you know what all that gave me? Chronic insomnia, constant anxiety, nights alone in a huge house that echoed with emptiness. This small, ordinary, unremarkable life you describe as if it were insufficient is the only one that makes me feel truly alive, that makes me wake up with purpose, that makes me want to be a better person." "And your fear?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "What is it? That you only accept me because your daughter likes me, that if she wasn't here, making these bridges between us, being the reason that keeps us connected, you would never look at me this way? That I'm just a package deal, along with the relationship you have with her?" He held her face with both hands, forcing her to look directly into his eyes, to see the truth he was about to declare. "My daughter is wise beyond her years. She saw what I was trying to ignore out of fear. But what I feel is completely mine. It doesn't depend on her to exist or be valid. You make me want to be a better man, a better father, a better person. You make me believe that new beginnings are possible, no matter how many times you've failed before. I love you. I don't love the idea of you. I don't love what you could do for me. I don't love out of convenience. I love you, complicated, imperfect, scared, brave, all of you." Tears she had been trying to control finally spilled freely. "I never truly belonged anywhere," she whispered, "until here, until you, until this strange and improbable family we're building." And he kissed her then, finally, after weeks of tension and hesitation and fear. He kissed her softly at first, carefully, as if she were made of something precious and breakable, and she returned it, pouring into that kiss months of loneliness, years of emptiness, decades of never truly being seen, and finally, being seen completely and still being loved, perhaps even because of the imperfections and not despite them. When they separated, needing to breathe, both were smiling through their tears. "We'll probably mess this up eventually," she said, but without real conviction, just acknowledging the reality of human relationships. "Probably," he agreed, "but it will be our disaster, our mess, and we'll fix it together, the way real people do, without giving up at the first difficulty." In the months that followed, life found a new rhythm, a new balance. She further reduced her professional commitments, keeping only what was meaningful and sustainable. She invested heavily in community projects in the neighborhood, not paternalistically, but collaboratively, listening to what people truly needed instead of imposing what she thought they needed. She created scholarships for young people to study, especially those from families who otherwise couldn't afford it. She transformed empty properties into cultural spaces, community libraries, art centers, and he accepted that loving someone with power and resources didn't mean diminishing himself or losing identity. That she had chosen to be there, with him, not out of lack of options, but because it was where she genuinely wanted to be. That real love isn't about equality of bank accounts, but about equality of respect, care, emotional commitment. Lily blossomed in ways that even surprised him, having two people who loved her unconditionally, without reservations, without competition. And she learned, seeing the two of them together, that true love doesn't have to be perfect or without conflict. It just needs to be honest, to be constantly worked on, to be chosen daily even when difficult. The town continued to change inevitably, because change is a constant impossible to completely stop. But now, in a different, more conscious way, preserving history while embracing a necessary future, valuing community while allowing sustainable growth. And residents commented on the businesswoman who chose people over maximum profit, who lived in a simple neighborhood and seemed genuinely happy in ways that money had never bought before. One night, almost a year after that first call about a broken sink that she confessed to having broken on purpose as an excuse to meet them, the three were in the yard watching stars that managed to pierce the city's light pollution. Lily dozed between them, her head in her father's lap, her feet in Sarah's lap, completely safe and loved. "Do you remember when I showed up here pretending I needed help?" she asked softly, her voice filled with nostalgia. "Pretending," he teased gently. "That sink was really broken." She laughed softly, not to wake Lily. "I broke it on purpose. I needed an excuse to meet you two. I had seen you with her, the way you took care of her, the patience, the obvious love. And I wanted, I don't know, to be part of it somehow, even without knowing it was possible." "And you were right," he said, pulling her closer carefully. "From the beginning you felt we were important." "From the beginning," she agreed, "even without understanding how or why. I just knew you were the answer to a question I'd been asking my whole life without knowing how to formulate it. And there, under stubborn stars that insisted on shining despite everything, in a simple house in an old neighborhood, three people who weren't born to be family created one anyway. Not perfect, because perfection doesn't exist outside of fantasy, not without challenges, because real life always comes with complication, but real. True, consciously chosen every day, theirs. The kitchen light was still on when they entered, carrying Lily, who slept deeply, and through the window, any passing neighbor would see an absolutely common scene. A family preparing a child for bed, caring for each other with the casual tenderness of those who do it every day. Living that small life that is, in the end, after all the money is counted and all the power is measured, the only one that truly matters, the only one that leaves a true legacy in the hearts of the people you love and who love you back. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.